Good evening and a very warm welcome to this, the third of our 2025 series of Gifford Lectures here at the University of Aberdeen, taking place with the support of the Templeton Religion Trust. My name is Tom Greggs and I hold the Marshall Chair of Divinity here at Aberdeen and serve on the Gifford Committee. It gives me great pleasure this evening to introduce you once again to our current Gifford lecturer, Professor Miroslav Volf, the Henry B. Wright Professor of Theology at Yale Divinity School, and the founder and director of the Yale Center for Faith and Culture. It gives me particular personal pleasure to be able to do this, as about 20 years ago almost, as a young academic, I was a respondent at a conference at which Professor Volf spoke amongst many other of the great and the good of the theological world. Despite being so junior and rather terrified at the prospect of having to respond to him, nobody could have been more gracious, more encouraging, more supportive, or more humane. So it is a particular delight to welcome him here to the University of Aberdeen, where I now teach. Those of you who have attended previous lectures will know and have experienced already how engaging a speaker Professor Volf is. And so I would like to welcome him now to give the third of his lectures, Amor, Fati, Nietzsche's Universal Affirmation and Limited Love. Will you join me in welcoming Professor Volf?
Professor Greggs, much thanks for your very kind words of introduction. I'm really glad that I was so nice to you. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, some of you who know my work will know that I'm a great fan of Nietzsche. Those of you who know me personally know that I have read Nietzsche's work for years, every evening for devotions. I'm serious. I taught a class at the school, evangelical school, when I was teaching at Fuller, on Nietzsche, and I made it a rule that no negative comments about Nietzsche may be said in this class. Well, the time has come, dear Friedrich, to move beyond gratefully receiving your profound critique of Christianity and say how deeply I think you are wrong about what you propose instead. And if Nietzsche can hear me, he'll also recognize that even in my critique, I have learned from him. So last lecture ended with Schopenhauer, so let me start very briefly with Schopenhauer and immediately go to Nietzsche, his pupil. The world has failed Schopenhauer's expectations. It has proven itself incapable of giving any of his desires, appetites, immediate, full, and abiding satisfaction. Like an irrationally demanding lover, he has been rebuffed. And yet, instead of asking whether something might be wrong with his expectations, Schopenhauer decides to blame the world and wish its non-existence. For him, a specific kind of desire is a given, sovereign. Its unfulfillment is suffering, and any suffering pushes the value of existence below zero. Though Schopenhauer was his teacher, Nietzsche soon lost patience with him, except that he made Schopenhauer's question about the value of existence his own. Nietzsche's entire philosophy is an alternative to Schopenhauer, though not just that, of course. Schopenhauer is a hedonist. His chief disvalue is suffering, and his chief value, abiding satisfaction. Nietzsche is an anti-hedonist. His chief disvalue is weakness, and his chief value, enhancement of one's own power. Schopenhauer's odium mundi, hatred of the world, to that, Nietzsche responded with amor mundi, love of faith. We ought to love the entirety of what is, past, present, and future, the massive weight of suffering in the world notwithstanding. Unlike Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, we often mix and match, and we do so even with our chief values, guiding values. Even those of us who embrace hedonistic ideal of satisfaction can find ourselves resonating with Nietzsche's vision of great striving and growing power. It is hard for us not to inwardly nod our heads in approval when we read Albert Camus asserting the struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill man's heart. We can understand why Nietzsche would celebrate power. We may more worry, however, about his signature idea, his love of what is, what was, and what is to come. Nietzsche made much of it, and of what he believed were the inadequacies of Jesus' love for the world. In siding with the ill-constituted and the suffering, the God revealed in Jesus Christ suppresses vitality. The Christian concept of God represents, he believed, the low mark in the development, in the descending development of the God type. God degenerated into a contradiction of life. In God, nothingness deified, will to nothingness sanctified. In this lecture, I will argue that both Nietzsche's chief value, enhancement of power, and his signature idea, amor fati, systematically undermine any love that is worthy of that name. To do so, I will examine his notion of will to power, two statements about loving concrete human beings, and then his idea of amor fati. At the beginning of the only volume of his planned revaluation of all values that he actually wrote, Nietzsche asks and answers in catechetic style two fundamental questions for the life of every human being. What is good and what is happiness? In answering them, he names what he considers to be his most basic value. The criterion for value of everything what Charles Taylor calls a hypergood. So what is this kind of good for Nietzsche? Everything that heightens the feeling of power, the will to power, power itself in humans. What is happiness? The feeling that power is growing, that the resistance is being overcome. For Nietzsche, striving to enhance one's power is not a specifically human trait. The basic human instinct is the same as the basic instinct of all living things. Each aims at enhancement of its own power. Making such striving his highest value is for Nietzsche the central aspect of loving life as it is. Given that Nietzsche often, though not always, associates overcoming resistance with having opponents, the form of resistance that serves self-enhancement is often the counterforce of competitors. In the Genealogy of Morality, he writes that the will to power is a will to overwhelm, will to topple, will to become master, thirst for enemies and resistances and triumphs. Similarly, in the will to power, he writes that the feeling of pleasure lies precisely in the fact that the will is never satisfied unless it has opponents and resistance. In many instances, then, the will to power aims concretely at superiority, at being more powerful than others, in philosophy and arts, no less than in sports, politics, and of course, warfare. Nietzsche also highlights striving for superiority in contrasting his will to power to Darwin's struggle for survival. He writes, "The great and small struggle everyone revolves around superiority, around growth and expansion, around power in accordance with a will to power, which is simply will to life." Human beings do not just want power, neither do they just want their power to grow. Human beings want growing power that is greater than the power of their competitors. This belongs, I believe, to the logic of power in social context. I have power only when I have more power than my competitors or relative comparons. And my power is the greatest when I set the standards by which all others must be measured. Importantly, the condition of superiority is always only temporary. Struggle continues eternally, writes Nietzsche, echoing Heraclitus' dictum that war is the mother of all things. Striving for permanent increase has no terminal goal. Every goat, greatest of all time, every goat is a goat only for a time. For the will to power to be the mode of love of life, ongoing striving for superiority too would have to be the mode of love for life. But is that plausible? In his early essay, Homer on Competition, Nietzsche recommends the form of human relations organized around the practice of agon, struggle with others conducted not as destructive combat, but as power-enhancing contest. Three features of agon distinguish it from war. First, agon is not action of a struggle to the death, but action of competition. Second, agon is a context of opponents. With rough parity of power, monopolies are non-agonal. Third, since agon is a contest for mastery of relative equals, the contestants incite each other to action and growth, just as they keep each other within certain limits. But the line between life-enhancing agon and life-destroying violence turns out to be difficult to maintain. In the later work, Beyond Good and Evil, Nietzsche repeats some of the conditions of genuine agon, noting that it can take place only within small groups of equally powerful nobles who share basic values. He immediately qualifies the condition. If we were to make equality and prohibition against violence basic principle of society as a whole, we would promote, he writes, the will to denial of life, the principle of disintegration and decline. Here's how he explains this position. Life itself is essentially, am I okay? Oh, okay. Life itself is essentially appropriation, injury, overpowering of what is foreign and weaker, oppression, harshness, imposition of one's own form, incorporation, and at least at its mildest, exploitation. Even those bodies within which individuals treat each other as equal must do to other bodies everything that the individual within it refrain from doing to each other. It, the social body, will have to incarnate the will to power, will to grow, will to spread, pull things in to try to gain upper hand. And why? Not due to some morality or immorality, but because it lives, and because life simply is will to power. Now, in Homer and Competition, the value of the image, in Homer and Competition, the image of raging tiger with wanton cruelty in its terrible eyes stood for the violence Nietzsche sought to overcome with the help of agon. After having introduced his signature idea of the will to power, The constraints on violence that Agon was meant to introduce had lost some of their force. These constraints, he explains, can in certain crude sense become good manners between individuals if conditions allow. And the conditions do not apply at all to relationships between groups. The idea that competitive and goalless striving to increase one's power is the final good does very important work in Nietzsche's philosophy. It allows him to place the meaning-giving goal of life into life itself and deny it a position outside of life where Platonism and Christianity, religion more generally, had placed it. This is where Schopenhauer too had placed the meaning-giving goal, as he considered striving that never came to full and lasting satisfaction, both an argument against existence and means, as you might recall, if you've been here day before yesterday, and means of achieving nothingness. In contrast to Schopenhauer, for Nietzsche, striving is good. Happiness does not rests in feeling that one's power is growing. The consequence, however, that embracing striving for superiority have for Nietzsche's relationship to the world are momentous. First, in the modern world, individuals are, as Nietzsche puts it, crossed everywhere with infinity, and therefore condemned to ceaseless striving. By this he means there's no determinate goal. Like swift-footed Achilles in the parable of Zeno of Iliad, infinity impedes him. He cannot overtake the tortoise. The will to power aims at surpassing the level reached at any given time, and that goal can never be reached. You're always equally behind. Second, striving for superiority so as to enhance power does not just elevate some, the stronger ones. If the difference in power between parties is increased, the weak become weaker in socially significant sense, even if their power has objectively increased. Successful striving for superiority inferiorizes. This too tracks with a feature of modernity, its logic of increase. Nietzsche's power, agon, more power, is analogous to money, capital, more money. Without placing agon in a sternly moral and legal frame, as the wise seek to do with economic competition, its effect will be the general inferiorization of people. Finally, the inferiorization that the will to power generates would be less troubling were it not that Nietzsche does not recognize any intrinsic values. As a consequence, competitor and everything else that offers resistance are likely to become mere means for the enhancement of power. Perhaps at the highest level of competition, one can point, at some point, Nietzsche writes about competition between three or few more geniuses. Competitors can, under those circumstances, perhaps avoid treating each other as mere means. When it comes to those he believed to be inferior or slave type of humans, he praises the idea that they are means to make possible superior types of human. With the will to power as his chief goal, Nietzsche might not have so much rescued life from Christian and Platonic nihilism as devalued not just most competitors, but also most of their accomplishments, as I will argue in the last lecture. Everyone is a disposable means to feeding the growth of individuals' vitality. Nietzsche's philosophy is not philosophy of life, but the philosophy of vitality which enhances the power of some, but degrades most. Agonism implies ascribing positive value to suffering. Schopenhauer, a hedonist, objects to the claim of Jewish and Christian traditions that life without suffering is possible. Nietzsche, an anti-hedonist, objects to the biblical claim that life without suffering is desirable. Commenting on Genesis 2 and 3 in The Will to Power, he writes, God created man happy, idle, innocent, and immortal. Our actual life is a false, decayed, sinful existence, an existence of punishment. Suffering, struggle, work, death are considered as objections to and question marks against life, as something that ought not to last, for which one requires cure, and has such cure. From the time of Adam until now, man has been in an abnormal state. God himself has sacrificed his son for the guilt of Adam in order to put an end to this abnormal state. The natural character of life is a curse. Christ gives back the state of normalcy to him who believes in him, makes him happy, idle, and innocent. The whole struggling, battling, actual existence, full of splendor and darkness, only a bad, false existence. The task is to be redeemed from it. Nietzsche's concern with Genesis 2 to 3 is that it distorts most basic character of human beings. To hold innocence, idleness, immortality, and happiness to be supremely desirable is to make human destruction desirable. The criticism is powerful, I think, if we fail to distinguish sufficiently between two forms of the world, this present form of the world and the form of the world to come. Those of you who were here at the first lecture will remember that I tried to introduce this distinction between world as such and different forms of the world. So now, this world and the world to come are those different forms of the world as distinct from the world as such. For the present form of the world, vulnerability, suffering, and death are essential, I believe. In the world to come, they will be absent. Building on David Kelsey's work, I want to suggest that we should not place the two forms of the world on the same scale of value, one imperfect and the other perfect. Though the nature of the goodness of the two forms of the world, meaning this world and the world to come, though the nature of the goodness of the two forms of the world overlaps, each is also good in its own way. Immortality and abiding happiness are goods of the world to come. Vulnerability, suffering, and death are goods of the present world, though they are goods that make possible some of the worst evils. It is a false choice either to reject all suffering, as Schopenhauer does, or to embrace it all, however severe, as Nietzsche does. I realize that what I've just said is pretty controversial, so I will expect few questions about it. Agonists, notes Nietzsche plausibly, take upon themselves suffering in overcoming resistance. They also inflict it upon their opponents. In The Joyful Science, Nietzsche brings together these two sides of our relation to suffering. He contrasts heroic individuals with weaklings who, in the prospect of pain, hear a command to take in the sails. There are human beings who hear exact opposite command when the great pain is approaching, who are never prouder, more warlike, and happier than when facing down the storm that blows in. Indeed, pain itself gives them their greatest moments. These are heroic human beings. But then, in the middle of the sentence, he shifts from enduring suffering to inflicting suffering. These heroic human beings, Nietzsche continues, are the great pain bringers of humanity. Those few of rare types who deserve precisely the same apology as pain in general. And truly, it should not be denied them. They are species-preserving and species-promoting forces of the first order. For Nietzsche, one such hero was Napoleon Bonaparte, whose military expeditions left about 6 million dead and many more wounded. To most of them, he brought only woe, which served no positive purpose. Nietzsche had no better comfort for such sufferers than to tell them that their death and pain help heroic individuals to do their species-promoting work. Once again, Nietzsche affirms vitality at the expense of concrete human beings. Shift from will to power to amor mundi. Slow shift, transition. After 10 years of solitude, Nietzsche has his Zarathustra coming down from the mountain to begin his mission to humanity. On the way, he meets an old saint and tells him, "I love humans." The saint responds by explaining why he has chosen to live in the desert. "I love God. Man, I love not. Man is for me too imperfect a thing. Love of man would kill me." Zarathustra seems like takes a step back and responds, "I bring man a gift." Love, it seems, just is bringing his gift, certainly a nobler act than the saint's flight from imperfect humans into love for God. But what kind of love is Zarathustra's gift giving? Zarathustra had retreated to the mountaintop in part to flee from contemptible humanity. Why then is he coming down? "Behold, I am weary of my wisdom. Like a bee that has gathered too much honey, I need hands outstretched to receive it." Humans are repulsive, but they might be redeemable. What he loves in human beings is not who they actually are, but the fact that they are made to be a transition, bridge to the Übermensch. Zarathustra brings his wisdom, but is disheartened to find no hands to receive it. The multitude will have none of it. They laugh at him. But when he gathers disciples, they too prove disappointing. They're mere followers, incapable of being fellow agonists, of making the will to power the principle of their own lives. Finding no one worthy of his love, he returns to the mountaintop full of contempt. Zarathustra's two-way journey enacts his oscillation between what he haltingly and rather inappropriately calls love and deep contempt. Instability of Zarathustra's love is rooted in its nature. First, he comes to relieve himself of the weight of pain of his wisdom. As a lover, he is the giver in a need of recipients. And that not as a person who has experienced great joy and is bursting to share it, but as someone requiring relief. Love here is epithumia. Only now it is not seeking to fill a void, but to alleviate pain. Second, an essential condition of his love is that its recipients are worthy of it, that they themselves be transformed by his wisdom. When recipients are unworthy, contempt is appropriate. Now his love is eros, which facing unworthiness turns into contempt. As the pain of the need to give remains unrelieved, it increases Zarathustra's contempt for those who are not wise enough to benefit from his superior wisdom and to honor it. Both his neediness and the recipient's unworthiness limit the scope of his love. There is yet another limit to Zarathustra's love. Let's assume for a moment that he found fellow agonists ready to embrace his vision of the good. Do agonists, governed by the desire for enhancement of their power, love each other? We've encountered that question before. Possibly, that's three geniuses. But if so, then only as long as they prove good agonists and thus worthy of love. Love is in danger again of morphing into contempt. Since the will to power is essentially insatiable, the worthiness of the fellow agonists is always a moving target. While agon brings about enhancement of power and therefore also worthiness, it simultaneously devalues, inferiorizes whatever has been overcome, as I've noted earlier. What counted as worthy prior to enhancement becomes unworthy after it. The objects of Zarathustra's kind of love can be only a very small minorities. Most humans will always nauseate him. His love cannot have humanity and earth as its object. For that, Nietzsche would need a different kind of love. The one neither motivated by need nor based on worthiness. He would need precisely the kind of love that he thought prevented Jesus from loving humanity and earth. In The Joyful Science, Nietzsche offers a similar account of love that I've just offered by analyzing Zarathustra's relation to multitude and his disciples. He does so in the process of explaining his very questionable take on the difference between female and male loves. As I will show shortly, he will connect Zarathustra's love with what he calls male love. What woman means by love is clear enough, to Nietzsche at least. Complete devotion. Not merely surrender, with soul and body, without any consideration, any reserve, rather with shame and horror at the thought of a devotion governed by clauses and conditions. Man, when he loves a woman, wants precisely this from her. Woman wants to give herself and be taken. Her love is the very opposite of the will to power. Male love is the obverse of female love. Man wants to take, and so to be made even richer in himself through the increase of strength, happiness, faith that the woman gives him in giving herself. Male love is the mode of the will to power. Explaining why loyalty does not belong to the essence of this love, Nietzsche writes, male love, after all, is wanting to have. And then, but wanting to have comes to an end with having. In other words, his love is, in my terms, earlier terms, epithumic. The passage is significant not just because it illustrates how comfortable Nietzsche is reducing a person to mere means to an individual's will to power and calling that reduction love. It also specifies how Nietzsche understands the dynamic of desire and possession. It assumes a need-based account of desire and the denial of intrinsic value of any object, as we've seen Schopenhauer does. Once the need is satisfied in having, the desire ceases and the desire turns to a new object. For Schopenhauer, this shows the impossibility of satisfaction, the presence of desire being for him a form of suffering, an indicator of dissatisfaction. But not so for Nietzsche. Nietzsche rejects the ideal of satisfaction that would fully extinguish desire. Instead, he embraces a notion of desiring to desire. In Ecce Homo, Zarathustra is deemed the highest form of all beings, in part because he has the soul which, having being, dives into becoming. The soul that has, but wills itself into wanting and longing. Not at all wanting and longing for what it has, but refusing contentment, wanting and longing for new things. The idea that satisfaction is not in having, but ongoing desiring, is resonant with the idea that happiness consists in indefinite growth in power. In the second lecture, I noted how pervasive in the culture of modernity epithumic love is, and how it devalues. My term was garbages the world. Nietzsche affirms an analogous relation to the world. In fact, he elevates it to a principle of life. Joy in the destruction of the most noble and at the site of its progressive ruin. In reality, joy in what is coming and lies in the future, which triumphs over existing things, however good. Joy in tearing down, clearing away, has fully supplanted love's delight in the good that is. Nietzsche's account of desire leads him to endorse openly the kind of devaluation of the world most of us in late modernity practiced without noticing it, as I argued earlier. Epithumia, especially when affirmed as desire to desire, undermines the reality of love, and does so right at the point where love, in some sense, properly gets going. When lovers have come into possession of the object of their love, instead of forming attachment and caring for them, they discard and destroy them in preference for new ones. Love cannot abide. Its shelf life is shorter than the 2-year-old's toy. Unlike some Christian theologians, I do not think that abiding love requires desiring the end of desire. Perhaps in some possession of the object of love in a temporal eternity. To the contrary, as I see it, the end of time would be the end of anything we imagine as human love. Another controversial statement, but there it is. I take Nietzsche to be right that desiring this kind of release from time implies radical alienation from the world, its rejection. But what makes love for the world also impossible are two related claims that are central for Nietzsche: that the will to power is insatiable, and that love ceases with having. The two together imply endless striving for an unending stream of new conquest, new achievements, new things. As a result, love can only flicker. It moves from place to place because it can live only between places. If it took an abode, it would die. As I have noted at the end of the previous lecture, a better way of thinking about the relation between desire and possession is available. We can actually long also for what we have. And unless we do, we will never genuinely love the world or anything that is in it. But what about Nietzsche's great yes to life, his love of fate? At the beginning of Book 4 of The Joyful Science, a book that ends with Zarathustra, overrich with wisdom, descending from the mountain to bring it to the world, Nietzsche expresses a Goodyear wish. I want to learn more and more to see the necessity of all things as beautiful. And then I will be one of those who makes things beautiful. Amor fati. Let that be my love from now on. I do not want to wage war against ugliness. I do not want to accuse. I do not even want to accuse the accusers. Let looking away be my sole negation. And all in all and on the whole, I want at some point for once to be only a yes-sayer. As he was writing The Joyful Science, occasionally he would actually find himself in such a state. In a letter to his friend Overbeck, he writes, I am in a mood of fatalistic surrender to God. I call it amor fati. So much so that I would rush into a lion's jaws. As we saw in the passage quoted, he aspired to amor fati not as an occasional mood, but as an enduring state. Now, like most New Year's wishes, Nietzsche's was never fulfilled. He never became only a yes-sayer. Not so much, it seems, because he was incapable of it, though for that reason as well, but because he came to believe that the aspiration formulated in so general a way was itself, in an important sense, mistaken. No saying is essential to the will to power and to his whole project. As he noted at the beginning of that same book, my way of thinking demands a warlike soul, a desire to harm, lust for no saying. Later he described the tension between yes and no, evident in these quotes, as the psychological problem with Zarathustra type. How someone who says no to everything to an inordinate degree can nevertheless be the opposite of no-saying spirit. Nevertheless, carry his yes-saying blessing into all abysses. To see how Nietzsche's no's and yeses relate, we need to distinguish between our relation to the world as a whole and our relations to people, things, and events within it. Many robust no's, along with joyful yeses, are appropriate for things within the whole. The unconditional yes without any no should be said to the whole. A yes saying which encompasses literally everything, all glories and horrors alike, and everything in between. The world as it is, without subtraction, exception, and selection. This is Nietzsche's affirmation of life. Applied more narrowly to one's own life, it means to say yes to it as a whole and desire it exactly as it was, as it is, and as it is to become. All of its smaller no's and yeses included. Now, this kind of unconditional affirmation of life is the content of what Zarathustra calls his abysmal thought. He's referring to the idea of eternal recurrence of all things. At the end of that very same book of The Joyful Science, book 4, which started with a New Year's wish, Nietzsche announces for the first time eternal recurrence. Here's how it goes. This life, as you live it now and have lived it, you will have to live once more and countless times more. And there will be nothing new in it, rather every pain and every joy, every thought and every sigh will return innumerable times. How would you respond if that were true? He says, if a demon would fluster that into your ear. He invites his readers to experience the weight of the recurring life and world, not so much as the highest burden, but as the highest joy. To crave nothing more than just such a world. This would be living in a mood of universal, unconditional, and strictly all-encompassing love. But why should a person whose life principle is will to power aspire to such a love. With God dead, Nietzsche thinks that the world is like an infinite and often chaotic ocean. One can strive for increase of one's power without loving the terrifying world by resigning oneself to it and living in it begrudgingly. But on the whole, one might then even think that it's better to live in such a world than not. But that would be to take a stance too close to Schopenhauer's, the one Nietzsche made his life work to combat. For Nietzsche, only those are truly great who love, who crave just the world in which they live, with its torment, destruction, and annihilation. They're able to affirm not just their own striving for superiority, but the whole world in which life itself is competition, overpowering, oppression, exploitation. But can they really love even the striving that inferiorizes them? The eternal return not only of their overcoming, but of their being overcome? What kind of love could this be? It is not eros, love motivated by intrinsic value of its object. For nothing has intrinsic value for Nietzsche. It is not epithumia, love directed to object that satisfies a thirst. It's hard to see how fate, which includes many things of marked disvalue, can be object of either of these two loves. Beatrice Hahn-Pyle proposes that Nietzsche has in mind love which confers value, rather than responding to it either as valuable in itself or as a good means for slacking some thirst. Nietzsche writes, I want to learn more and more to see the necessity of things as the beautiful. Then I will be the one who makes things beautiful. To see things as beautiful and to make all things beautiful is, on Hahn-Pyle reading, a transfiguration of their value brought about by our love for them. As constant and great sufferer, we always have to remember when Nietzsche writes about suffering that he was suffering just about entirety of his life. As a constant and great sufferer, with amor fati, Nietzsche invented here a modest but voluptuous happiness. A happiness like that of an eye before which the sea of existence, even the raging sea of existence, has become calm and now cannot see enough of the surface and of the multi-hued, tender, trembling skin of the sea. The question, why do we love what we love, drops off. And how do we come to love replaces it. And so love comes to us in Hahn-Pyle's reading as an act of grace. And it does so primarily through great suffering. No justification or reasons are involved at all. We feel the pain that attaches to such experiences, but find ourselves able to love them nevertheless without holding them as objections to life. If indeed this is what Nietzsche is after, it would take a great deal of unmotivated trust to achieve such love. And even if we were to love the world with this kind of love, would it not rest on perceptual and existential illusion? Seeing something as beautiful, which makes things beautiful. We see as beautiful what we at the same time know to be hideous. Nietzsche has no way to resolve this attitudinal existential tension. As I will note shortly, Martin Luther and Hannah Arendt actually do. When discussing his abysmal thought, Nietzsche has Zarathustra say more than once, nausea, nausea, nausea. Woe unto me. He imagines a snake crawling into Zarathustra's mouth to illustrate the feeling. What triggers Zarathustra's powerful loathing? It cannot be the destructiveness and cruelty in the nature and history or awareness of the ghastly absurdity of existence. These are just unalterable features of the world. Amor fati should have taken care of them. Here's the cause of his nausea. Alas, man recurs eternally. Small man recurs eternally. Naked, I had once seen both, the greatest man and the smallest man, all too small to each other. Even the greatest, all too human, all too small, the greatest. That was my disgust with man, and the eternal recurrence even of the smallest. That was my disgust with all existence. Alas, nausea, nausea, nausea. The smallness of humans, their weakness. They're all too human and nauseate Zarathustra. As the reference to nakedness of the greatest and the smallest human indicates, Zarathustra is disgusted not just with the rabble, but with the human more broadly, comprehensively. The main way Zarathustra overcomes nausea is through isolation in the highest height, a solution not entirely different from that of the old world-hating saint whom Zarathustra meets on his back down the mountain, the one who had retreated into desert because the love of man would kill him. But isolation does not help, because it confirms Zarathustra's inability to affirm life fully when he is in the proximity of the weak. It only lays bare his failure to say eternal yes to all things. At the end of his active life, Nietzsche notes that disgust at humans is his greatest danger, and in fact embraces isolation as the path to redemption from disgust. His love fails to encompass the great majority of actually living human beings. So what are we to make of Nietzsche's project? In striving for superiority in his affirmation of life and in his love of faith, Nietzsche is largely a despiser of life in its concreteness, albeit one with no otherworldly hopes. The will to power is an attempt to rescue life from Christian nihilism and from Schopenhauer's disappointed hedonism, but it generates too much contempt to count as love at all. When it comes to the scope of worldly love, and its quality too, Jesus, I believe, has a distinct advantage over Zarathustra. Nietzsche's favorite metaphor for Zarathustra is the sun. From the sun, I learned this. When it goes down over rich, it pours gold into the sea out of its inexhaustible riches, so that even the poorest fishermen still rows with golden oars. It's amazing. This is some of the best of Nietzsche's prose, and if you read The Joyful Science, you'll get pages of it. It's incredible, I think. That's why I love the guy. The image is beautiful and illustrates well the superabundance Zarathustra feels, and yet it fits ill with two features of Zarathustra's love I had identified: the need from which it springs and the demand for worthy recipients on which it depends. Combination of epithumia and eros. Even though Zarathustra imagines the sun could not be happy without those for whom it shines, the sun in fact has no need to bestow its gift of light and warmth. It gains nothing from imparting its gifts, certainly not relief. And unlike Zarathustra's gifts, the gifts of the Son bestows manifestly do not require worthy recipients. The poor fisherman does not need to make himself worthy for the Son to turn the oars in his callous hands into gold. The Son's love is all-encompassing and unconditional. Now, Jesus too uses the image of the Son to illustrate his core teaching about love. God makes his Son to rise on the evil and the good alike. Jesus' love is beyond the distinction between good and evil, beyond the difference between worthiness and unworthiness. No one nauseates Jesus. The masses of the poor and sick, many of whom follow him from wrong reason, do not. Those who have no ears to hear his message, no hands to receive his gifts, do not either. The disciples do not, even those who deny and betray him. Nietzsche aspires to transfiguration of all things through value-bestowing love. But he cannot overcome nausea over humans. He cannot eliminate demand of worthiness from his love for humans. The scope of his love remains, therefore, severely limited. Jesus loves with universal, unconditional love, not motivated by his own need, and utterly undaunted by the unworthiness of its objects. Martin Luther built his entire theology on the foundation of the primacy of God's unconditional love. Such love is what makes creation be, what gives it existence, its preciousness. Such love is also what attends to creatures' violated integrity and seeks to make them beautiful, transfiguring both how they are seen, Nietzsche's interest, and the way they are. Implicit in unconditional love is the distinction between what Luther called person and work. In a familiar way of speaking, we, you and I, are more than the worst thing we have done. And as Kierkegaard would say, we're also more than the best we have achieved. I mentioned his comment on Solomon, and here again, Solomon is more glorious as a human being than he is as a king. Possibly better than using categories of person and work would be to distinguish between human beings as such, their sheer existence, which makes it possible to sheer existence and their qualities, as Hannah Arendt does. So for Luther, Kierkegaard, and Arendt. This distinction is, in Arendt's word, the fruit of the incalculable grace of love, which makes it possible to stay with those we love through the history of their transformations, whether positive or negative, to love them and care for them in whatever state they find themselves. Theologically, the distinction is rooted in God's presuppositionless and unconditional love for creatures. Love that is insuppressibly alive, irrespective of the value or disvalue of creatures' capacities and achievements. God's love for creatures themselves is unconditional. It is agapic. Love for the states in which they find themselves, their capacities and achievement, is conditioned by their qualities. God's relation to the states in which humans are is erotic. As I explained in lecture 2, eros and agape are not mutually exclusive. They're complementary. But agape is primary and overarching. Eros is subordinate and regional. For Luther and Kierkegaard, the distinction between sheer existence and existence with certain qualities is anthropological. Arendt too applies this distinction to humans as members of a shared world. I propose to extend it to the lived world as a whole. It requires us to distinguish between the world as such and the particular form of the world or state in which it finds itself, as I've explained earlier. The distinction can help us imagine how could it be possible to love the world which in so many ways does not deserve to be loved. To love despite widespread gratuitous suffering and cruelty in it. We might then even come to love the world in certain sense because of such stubborn suffering and cruelty, as I will argue in my next lecture. Thank you very much.